Pokémon Scarlet and Violet is one of the most divisive games on the Switch, as well as in the entire Pokémon series. While it's Pokémon's first attempt at an ambitious open 3D world, Scarlet and Violet will forever go down as the worst looking Pokémon game to date, thanks to its horrendous performance issues, ranging from its sluggish frame rate, clipping textures, and myriad of bugs.
Oh my god!
And yet, despite those flaws, it is still one of the best Pokémon games ever made, offering some of the best new Pokémon designs, and by far the best storytelling and lore the series has offered to date. And now this contentious game is finally complete, with the second part of its DLC expansion pass, The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero, now out there for everyone to play. For half the price of the full game, you can expand the experience with a new story scenario, new and returning Pokémon, and a bunch of extra challenges and modes. So for that price, is it worth dipping your toes back into the glitchy waters of Paldea once more? Let's find out! The first half of the expansion is the Teal Mask, a school trip to the Japanese-inspired Kitakami. As someone who loves visiting the Japanese countryside, this setting is one of my favourite Pokémon regions to date, despite its relative small size and scope. Your visit coincides with a summer festival and the reappearance of the region's legendary Pokémon. While the scenario is predictable and safe, the quality of character work here is as excellent as that in the base game, if not more so. In my review of the base game, I commended Game Freak for the Penny and Team Star storyline, as it deals with the theme of school bullying, an important and relatable theme for Pokemon's intended younger demographic. I'd take that over supervillains trying to take over time and space any day, as it's more grounded, more emotional, and ultimately more cathartic. Here, this emotional backbone is provided by new characters Carmine and Kieran, two students from Unova's Blueberry Academy, the setting of the DLC's second part, the Indigo Disc. Kieran takes the role of the player's rival in this DLC, and he also gives the storyline relatable themes for young people: jealousy, ambition, and rivalry. He's one of the most outwardly emotional characters in the whole Pokemon franchise, and his arc resembles the transformation I went through as a teenager. Essentially, he starts off meek and pathetic, then goes through a range of wild emotions. It reminded me a lot of that hormonal time in everyone's youth, puberty. Yeah, I know, I'm probably overanalyzing this for a Pokemon game, but the point stands. This storyline is one of the best in Pokemon to date, and I am so glad Game Freak went for great characterization and emotionality in this DLC, and it's a great storyline that continues into the Indigo Disc, in which you visit the Blueberry Academy, an underwater terrarium with 4 artificial biomes. I hated this concept originally, as I thought an artificial world with blocky protrusions everywhere looked a bit too Minecrafty for me, but I came around to it. It's something that's never been done in Pokemon before, so I'd rather take brand new concepts over rehashed ones. While the setting may be new, your objectives are rehashed. It's here you'll take down an Elite Four, like games of old, before your bout with the champion. While it's yet another Elite Four and champion, the tried and true formula works, and there is a new twist here. All battles in the terrarium are double battles. I love double battles, and anything that evokes Pokemon Colosseum or Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness is a win in my books. And what finally seals the deal is the difficulty. The Pokemon here, whether wild or in battle, are insanely high leveled, between levels 65 and 85. Not only that, but the Elite Four cheat too, using items that negate damage and having Pokemon that counter almost all their elemental weaknesses. This is something that has been missing from Pokemon for the last decade. Challenge. While Sword and Shield were so easy they basically played themselves, Scarlet and Violet increased the challenge and they cranked it to 11 in Indigo Disc. I couldn't be happier, as having this deep, intricate battle system is pointless in single player when you can just spam powerful moves, so I loved having to think a bit more deeply in single player story content. And that extends to the climax of the game, which finally closes the book on the Area Zero storyline from the base game. The return trip down there was some pretty edge-of-your-seat stuff, especially the clash with this DLC's mascot Terrapagos, which has to be one of the most brutal bouts with a legendary Pokemon to date. I was actually screaming in frustration, which for a sucker for punishment like me was a real treat. It ends the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet storyline as well as you'd expect. There's still emotional closure, but some of the loose threads are left untied. I suppose that is just lore by its very nature, and this is definitely not surprising coming from the Pokemon series, which has done this before. While I'd love for all the Area Zero mysteries to be definitively solved, at least Pokemon Theory YouTubers can still make a living. Speculation about what truly went on down there will likely never end, so I'll leave that up to you to decide whether that's acceptable or disappointing. So, what else is new here? Your ride Pokemon gets the ability to fly, which is about as clunky as you'd expect. It's easy flying in a straight line, but trying to turn sharp corners is a nightmare, especially in the minigame where you fly through rings. At least this minigame in Indigo Disc is a bit fun, unlike Teal Mask's balloon popping minigame, which was one of the most boring I've ever experienced. There's also the hilarious Synchro Machine, which lets you momentarily inhabit the body of your Pokemon and run around. Playable Pokemon is something I never knew I wanted, but it's only a novelty after all, especially as they can't jump. Surfing around with Golden Gull is the closest Pokemon will ever get to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and it reminded me of shield surfing in Breath of the Wild too, so give that a go if you can. Adding value to the experience is new and returning Pokemon. This must be like Christmas for kids who are seeing and catching all these returning Pokemon for the first time, but for a grumpy old man like me whose Pokemon home is stuffed full of 20 years worth of creatures, I was disappointed at the lack of totally new Pokemon. There are about a dozen new Pokemon here, but sadly they're all legendaries or evolutions or variations of pre-existing Pokemon. I love Sinistcha and Dipplin, but I really would have liked just a few more. There's also the chance to rematch gym leaders, so any new content featuring the best character ever created, Larry, is a win in my books. And of course, there's new costumes, items, character interactions, and music. More music by the legend Toby Fox is always welcome, especially his new variation on the iconic Area Zero theme. So there's a lot of content here to justify the asking price of this DLC. For me, it was much better value than Sword and Shield's expansion pass, which for me did not offer enough in terms of new items, emotional storytelling, and new Pokemon. I'm so glad that the Pokemon Company stopped doing third installments and started doing expansions instead. While I lamented their choice in the Sword and Shield era, at least the hidden treasure of Area Zero justifies this choice. And now, to address the Don fan in the room, the performance. Ugh. Despite getting consumers to invest in post-launch DLC, next to nothing has been done to make this game run better or fix the pervasive issues it has. When you enter the terrarium for the first time, it's meant to be this epic moment, as it cuts to rousing music and wide establishing shots. But it's hard to feel anything in these establishing shots, as textures are clipping and popping in late. Scarlet and Violet has always been held together with pipe cleaners and duct tape, and in the year since release, nothing has been done to address this. The only slight difference I noticed was icons in your Pokemon boxes load faster, making menu navigation just a tad smoother. Disappointing, but not surprising. If you could get past the issues a year ago, you still can now, but boy do they hamper the overall gameplay. So, to sum this up, the hidden treasure of Area Zero is a worthwhile and value-packed expansion to Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, which totally justifies its existence. Far better than the expansion of the previous generation's Sword and Shield, this DLC brings much-needed challenge back to mainline Pokémon, and continues the excellent and emotional storytelling of its base game. Overall, it is still an extension of what came before, which means performance issues hold Pokemon back from achieving its ambitious open-world goals. Whatever your thoughts on the poor performance are, there is still more good than bad in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's concluding chapter, and it's worth purchasing the hidden treasure of Area Zero to send off one of Pokemon's most exciting generations. So, thanks for watching until the end. What are your thoughts on this DLC? And what are your hopes for the next Pokemon game? Let me know down below, and I'll reply to you. As for me, I'd really like to see another Legends-style game. I'm hopeful we will get one set in Unova, hopefully with a delightful Wild West theme, to match its historic US-inspired setting. Pokemon Red Dead Redemption, anyone? And I'd love some silly Wild West accents if they do finally decide to debut voice acting. A man can only dream. Anyway, for more game reviews like this, don't forget to hit subscribe. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.